I'm going to walk through the steps that I took to wire up and install a Grade Crossing Pro with infrared sensors and detectors on my HO scale layout. The reason why I wanted to do this video is because before I installed my Grade Crossing Pro, I went to YouTube to see if there were any good instructional videos on how to get one of these systems installed. And there really, no offense to anybody if you've done one of these videos, but I really didn't find a great video that walked through step by step how to wire this up and get it installed. So that's what I'm going to do. Another thing you'll notice is this is not my normal style of doing a video on YouTube. Usually I have live video that I narrate through. Here for the first majority of the video today, I'm going to narrate over some still photos, because this is the best way that I could to really clearly show how I got this system wired up. So I purchased this entire system directly from Logic Rail Technologies. I searched on eBay, I searched on the various online hobby stores, I checked my local hobby shop. Nobody seemed to carry the Grade Crossing Pro when I was trying to purchase it. The thing I like about Logic Rail Technologies is they post all of their instruction sheets online. So if you're thinking about doing this, I want you to go to their website and you can download the instruction sheet for the product you want to purchase. I do want to put a very big disclaimer out there that this video is for informational purposes only. I am only sharing with you what I did. I do not want my video to be a substitute for reading and following the instructions provided by the manufacturer. So one of the things I noticed right away before I even purchased this about reading about this particular module is that it has very specific requirements for the power supply. You cannot exceed a 12-volt DC power supply, or it can damage your lights, or it can damage the circuitry on the board. So you have a couple different options available to you. Logic Rail produces a 12-volt DC power regulator. I just went ahead and purchased that. You can use some AC power off of a power pack. Again, do that at your own risk. Follow the instructions that Logic Rail provides. Second thing that you'll notice, to finish this off, I had to get an AC adapter that I can plug into the wall that plugged into the power supply. I also needed some resistors. I have some resistors that I purchased for literally, I think I got 50 of them for $2 or $3. And then I got a dual bus power block, because if you look at the instructions, you need to wire up several components to a DC source and a ground source, so it's just easier to get a bus to accomplish that. And then I also have several terminal strips, as you'll see that I go through the video. Another thing that I purchased, the actual signal that I'm going to use is just a Walther Seamaster post-1960s cantilever grade crossing, and you can pick these up at your local hobby shop for pretty cost effective. Because there's another thing that I wanted to add to this, Logic Rail has a bell module, or a sound module, that you can actually have prototypical bell sounds as the crossings activate. So I purchased the sound module. You do not have to do this. This is optional, so you can install the Grade Crossing Pro without the sound module. But if you purchase the sound module, you have to have a speaker apparatus. Logic Rail sells 2.5-inch speakers, I think, for $6 or $7. So I went ahead and purchased a speaker directly from them. Again, you can use any kind of speaker that you would like to, and it will work with this particular unit. So I have a lot of electrical equipment here, and I found it best to mount this actually on a piece of wood. I got a 6-inch by 12-inch piece of 8-inch pine at Hobby Lobby. I think that was $1.75 or $1.80. It was pretty cheap. And what I did was actually build my entire Grade Crossing Pro unit or module on this piece of wood, and then I was able to mount it on the underside of my layout. So to me, this is just a lot easier. I could sit at my workbench, build it, get everything wired up, have everything as a quick connect. So all I have to do is then mount this underneath my layout, and then hook it up, hook the sensors up, and hook the crossing signals up. So what I ended up doing was I took the original modules, all of the packaging out of the box, and I mounted them or marked them on the board where I wanted to mount them. So here is a picture where I have the actual Grade Crossing Pro. I just took a pencil and traced around where it was. I did that with the power supply, the sound module, the bus line, everything. What ends up happening is Logic Rail actually pre-drills some number 4 screw openings within the circuit boards for each of these, so you can easily mount them onto this piece of wood. I just went to Home Depot and got some number 4 wood screws that were 1/4 inch each, and they did not go through. They didn't penetrate through the thickness of the wood, so it basically mounted into the wood. So next thing you can see, what I ended up doing was, once I've got the Grade Crossing Pro mounted, the power supply mounted, the bell system mounted, I went through the instructions and figured out where all the connections I needed to be. So then I took some terminal strips, which are the white blocks on here, and I basically marked which color wires went into it and then what the outputs were that go into the Grade Crossing Pro. So you can see the terminal strip at the bottom center of your screen. You can see it has the PWF, PWN, PEN, PEF, and then I also mark those as the blue wires, because on your infrared emitters and detectors you have white wires, black wires, and blue wires. So this just helped more clearly define what color wires go into those particular terminal strips. So the one at the far left of the picture, and I know you can't really see it because it's just the angle of the camera, those are the black wires, and then at the very top those are the white wires. So now it's just time to go through, and I'm going to do step by step exactly how I wired this system up. So step 1 is you need to run 2 wires. It does not matter the polarity, and just make sure you match it up. You run 1 wire from the ground on your power supply to the ground input on your Grade Crossing Pro, and then you also have the 12 volt DC that goes from the 12 plus output on your power supply again over to the Grade Crossing Pro. That is step number 1. One of the things you'll notice, I wanted to use 22 gauge wire. So unfortunately, the amount of 22 gauge wire that I had on hand, I had a lot of white, a lot of blue, a lot of green, didn't have any black or red. I had a bunch of black and red 24 gauge, but I just wanted to use up the 22 gauge. So the colors probably aren't exactly what I would like them to be, but in my mind it worked fine using blue instead of black. But certainly it's your choice. I just didn't feel like it was justifiable to go out and spend a bunch of money to get 22 gauge black wire. So that's why the colors really are irrelevant. You just have to be able to line things up. So here's step 2, and I'm still showing step 2. I thought about deleting step 2 out of the pictures here, but I want you to learn from a possible mistake that I made. If you look at the instructions that come with the bell, the actual bell, it shows to run 2 wires from your power supply, 1 ground, 1 DC, and then run it into the power input on the bell module. So I followed the instructions that came with the bell module and wired it up this way. Thankfully, before I installed this on my layout, as I was going through the instructions that came with the Grade Crossing Pro, it actually gives you different instructions for how to wire up the bell module. So I've got a picture at the end. When I caught this mistake, I will show you the correct wiring for the bell module. So as of right now, ignore this step, but I wanted to show it to you as a potential mistake that I could have made. So then the third step is I just run 2 wires from the speaker output on the Grade bell to my terminal strip for the speakers, and then basically I just run 2 wires off my speakers, and then you can just wire them right up into that terminal strip. Step 4, I'm going to run the power, or the wires to power my bus strip. So there's 2 outputs, 1 ground, 1 DC. Those come straight from the Grade Crossing Pro. So basically I'm just putting 2 wires or 2 additional wires, one in the ground, one in the DC, where I wired it up from my power supply. So now I have 2 wires coming out of each of those outputs. Step 5, you can see at the very top the power or the terminal strip that has the COM, LO, and RO. Those are the inputs for your actual signal. So the COM is the common, that has to have a DC power supply to it. So just run 1 wire from your bus strip to the common, so that will correspond with the common wire that comes with your signal. Now I used Walthers. When you look at the instruction sheet for the Grade Crossing Pro, you can wire this up from multiple different brands. So if you have BMLA, or if you have Tomar, if you scratch build a crossing, the common wire has to be powered by the DC. So that's where this is. Okay, next step, you can see that I ran all of the wires that are indicated as blue wires from the bottom center terminal strip, the WF, WN, EN, and EF, and there are corresponding inputs on your Grade Crossing Pro, so I just ran 1 wire to the appropriate input on the Grade Crossing Pro. Next step, I did the exact same thing, and I apologize, those are green wires. Those will be the input black that come from your infrared emitters and detectors. So those are the ground. So, and again, I have them pre-labeled WF, WN, EN, EF, and I just have them 4 wires connected to my bus strip. Now the next step after that is you have to hook up some resistors to your actual to the next 2 inputs. So the Grade Crossing Pro actually comes with 4 resistors, and those are meant to attach to your emitters that go between the ties on your rails. So what I ended up doing, these correspond to the white wires off of your sensors. So I just have my I just have my soldering jig, hooked up my resistor, and soldered it up. You also have to wire or solder 2 resistors that actually go to the LEDs on your signal crossing, and those go to the LO and the RO outputs on your Grade Crossing Pro. So you can see that on this particular picture here. You can see I have those 2 wired up, depending upon the type of signal that you're using, if it's a Tomar or if it's a Walthers, and it also depends upon the power supply you're using. You have to use a different size of resistor based upon what you're using for your power supply and whether you're using LEDs versus an incandescent bulb. So I have those wired up, and those are what I purchased. So then the next step is, you can see at the top left, I added the 4 resistors that are going to go to the infrared detectors, and those will be connected to the white wires on your emitters and receivers. And then finally, this is the last step, and this is to go back and fix the error that I recognized or realized in step 2 of this process. So the instruction sheet for the Grade Crossing Pro shows you that you need to run an output from the TO, which is sort of, if you look at the Grade Crossing Pro, that upper blue bar, you can see that there's a TO output that runs over to the power supply on your bell module, and then you also have to run a wire from the 12 volt output into the bell module. So basically I just swapped out the ground wire and hooked it into the Grade Crossing Pro. But then the other piece of this is there's a jumper cable, and you can see that at the top right of this picture. it jumps some circuit, I don't know which one. The instructions were very vague, but you basically just have to put a jumper wire in there to get this to work properly. So this is what I did to get everything hooked up. So now all I have to do is mount this underneath my layout and then hook up the black wires that came off the emitters, the white wires that came off of them, and the blue wires, and everything is pre-marked in that particular location. Another thing that I did, because the speaker itself just comes as a speaker, there's no wires off of it, there's nothing, it's just basically a speaker. So there's two connectors on the back of the speaker. You can solder 2 wires to it, and again, the polarity of the speaker doesn't matter, so you can plug it in or you can wire it up to either input on the speaker output module from the bell. Another thing I did, I didn't want to just mount the speaker underneath my layout, so I took some 16th of an inch thick styrene, and I just made a small 3x3 box that was able to mount the speaker to, so it was more easily mounted up underneath the layout. Here's a picture of everything mounted underneath the layout. Another thing that I did was where the infrared detectors and emitters and receivers are, I took my label maker and I just labeled them EN, WN, EF, WF, so that way I knew the wires that were coming down where the labels were, that I knew how to hook them up properly to the Grade Crossing Pro. And then you can also see that I was able to mount my speaker box up underneath the layout, so everything is nice and contained underneath my layout. Here's just a picture real quickly of where all of the infrared emitters and receivers are. So you can see sort of towards the middle of this photo, you can see this is an aerial view, so you can see where the signal crossing actually is. You want to keep the F, or the FAR detectors, a fair distance away from the grade crossing, or where your signal is, so the train has an opportunity to activate it, and the signal activates prior to the train arriving at the grade crossing. So E is east direction, W is the west direction. I'll show you on an actual video here shortly of how this particular, how these sensors actually work when a train activates one of the FAR sensors, the sequence that it goes through to ensure that it shuts off after the train has cleared your crossing. Last thing I'll just briefly mention, I think I took about 10, maybe 12 hours to build this particular module and get everything wired up and installed properly. To me, it was time that was well worth it. I have a very well-functioning prototypical grade crossing now with the flashing lights and a bell. My advice to you is to certainly take your time with this. This is not something you want to rush through. The more time you put into it, you'll again have fewer issues. You're going to fight fewer bugs later than if you try to just rush through things. So think through it. I'm going to show you some other video, or I'm going to switch over and show you some live videos here of the grade crossing in operation. I made the choice of purchasing the infrared. Logic Rail Technologies does have an optical sensor where you can, it just uses visible light or ambient light. The problem with that, it's a little bit less expensive. I think I paid an extra $7 or $8 for this particular, for the infrared, but you can operate it at night, and I have a video that I'll show you of nighttime operations. The optical version will not operate at night because you need ambient light for it to operate. And the last thing I'll tell you is, again, the instructions that come with the Grade Crossing Pro are very detailed. I only have a single line running through my grade crossing, so I have one single line track. You can wire these up for a double line track. to get it to work prototypically, you'll actually have to get 2 Grade Crossing Pro modules in order for that to work. You actually cascade them to one another. But on my particular layout, as you can see this here, I actually have 2 WF sensors because I have my yard comes up and joins up with the main line in very close proximity to where the grade crossing is. So I wired both of these WF sensors into the same input. And now how that works is, really I can only run one train at a time, but again, that would be very prototypical that if you have a train that's on the main line waiting to enter the yard, or vice versa, if you have a train on the main line who's waiting for a train to depart the yard, only one is going to be able to go through the grade crossing at a time. So both of those WF locations work as a single sensor. It would mess up the system if you activated both of the WF sensors at the same time. So you would have to have one of them clear in order for it to work. Okay, let's get to the actual operations of the Grade Crossing Pro. Okay, I've moved underneath the layout, and as you can see, here is where I mounted my Grade Crossing Pro module. So there's 4 screws here that I basically just took the whole piece of wood and mounted it up to the underside of my layout. Here's where I mounted my speaker. I just mounted that with some 2-sided tape, so it's a pretty light box. And then what I ended up doing was I marked with my label maker where the actual sensors came down. So per location there are 2 total sensors, 2 wires per sensor, so a total of 4 sensors. 4 wires that I needed to hook up. You can see here's where my wires are. I apologize, the lighting is not the greatest underneath here. I've got a portable light underneath here. Here's the AC adapter as it plugs into the power converter. You can see that the power is on because this red light is lit up. I'm going to show you one thing real quick here about the Grade Crossing Pro and how to adjust the sensitivity of the unit. So here's just a little bit closer up look of the Grade Crossing Pro. Right now it's currently on and it's in operations mode. There are 2 switches on here, right here and here. The one that's closest to the left is the LP, or the lamp persistent function, and that is in the currently on position, so the lamp persistence is functional. The switch closest to the right is the setup mode. So right now I have this set up and ready to go in operations mode. So if I flip this switch, now I'm in setup mode. Up here I have 4 pots that adjust the sensitivity of each one of the infrared emitters and detectors. So what you're going to do is you're going to turn, now when you put it in setup mode, mine is already set up, but this is one of the things during the initial setup. More than likely when you install all this, get your sensors in place, this red light is on. And when the red light is on, it means that the sensors are triggered, even if there's no rolling stock over it or locomotive. And then your Grade Crossing Pro will be on all the time. So what you're going to do is you're going to take these pots and adjust them to the left until the light goes off. So I'm actually going to demonstrate that. So I'm going to adjust this to the right and see, there you go. That now is the WF, the west far sensor would be activated. So if I put this back into operations mode, that sensitivity of that detector won't work. So I'm going to put it back in setup mode. And again, when these come on, or if that red light is on when you're in setup mode, you just have to start adjusting the pots until it actually goes off. The other thing you can do to test this while it's in setup mode, if you roll a piece of rolling stock over this, this light will come on to indicate that that particular sensor is working. So I'll put that back in operations mode, and that's the underside of my layout. Here's a close-up of the optical detector and receiver, and I followed the instructions that came with Grade Crossing Pro. I drilled these in at a 45-degree angle. It is very difficult not to slightly damage the ties when you do that. My advice to you when you do this is to have both the detector and the emitter below the level of the tie. I had these just a little bit higher than the plane of the rail tie, and it actually was too sensitive. It was actually triggering when it shouldn't have, so I actually pushed these down there lower than the plane of the tie, and it seems to work very, very well. So this is just what they look like, and I have a total of 5 sets of these that I installed. Okay, to demonstrate how this works, I'm going to run a train through going from east to west, so from left to right on the screen. And the first thing you'll see is it's going to trigger the EF, or the east far sensor. So when it does that, the gate or the crossing and bell will activate, and it'll stay activated as long as it reaches the EN, which is the second sticky note. So here comes the train right next to the EF sticker, so you'll see it activate. So now we have 35 seconds for this to get to the EN. If it does not get to the EN, the near sensor, it will shut off. So I'm going to give it a little bit more speed here. So then there's the third sticky note that you can see, the WN, or the west near sensor. So the train is approaching the east near sensor, and it's going to activate that here in just a second. So now the signal and bell will remain active until the last car clears the WN, the west near sensor. So we'll just speed it up here a little bit. So then I've got sticky notes that indicate where the west far sensor is, or are, since there's 2 of them. So here comes the last piece of rolling stock. It's going to clear the WN. There, it cleared, and after about 3 seconds, the lights will deactivate. Perfect. So if you've noticed, right towards the tail end of the sequence, you sort of heard the bell recycle. The reason why is because there's only, I believe, 65 seconds worth of bell sounds that are programmed into the module. So if the bell stays active for longer than that period of time, the sound sequence has to start over, so you kind of hear that little pause while the sound sequence starts over. It's just the nature of this product. They talk about it in the instruction manual, so it's not anything to be alarmed about. It's just the sound file basically starting over. They just have it on a continuous loop. So now, just to demonstrate, I'm going to do this a little bit quicker. I'm going to back the train up, so it'll activate the west far sensor, and we'll just follow it through the crossing, and I'll do it a little bit quicker.